welcome back to my channel. I'm Rachel, the owner and creator here at the Eclectic Cottage in Spokane, Washington. Today is Saturday, and for today's video, I have some thrift flips for you guys. They ended up being very spring-centric, so hopefully you're ready for a little spring in your life. And without further ado, let's get to today's projects. My first project is a pretty simple one. I am just going to give the frame of this picture a makeover. It was in pretty good shape, but the original paint had kind of a matte finish to it and had several marks on it and just places where it was kind of dirty and stained and it just needed a refresh. After I masked off my glass, I went ahead and gave this a really good wipe down before I got started with painting. Now, honestly, I think the hardest part of this entire project was choosing my paint color. There are so many pretty colors in the picture itself to pull from, but in the end, I decided to go with something neutral and classy that would match just about any decor, and that's black. And for this paint job, I am using DIY's Little Black Dress, which is a beautiful, true black color. And DIY paint, if you've never used it before, it's a clay-based paint. There are no VOCs, so you're totally safe using it inside. It's relatively thick paint, and it's very highly pigmented. I could have probably stopped at one coat of this, but there were just a few little places where that white was poking through once it had dried, so I did go over it with a relatively thin second coat. Now, since DIY paint is water-based, you can use a mister bottle if you need to help thin out your paint, or like I am doing here, to just wet your paint so that your second coat goes on nice and smooth with as few brush strokes as possible. Now, being as how DIY paint is clay-based, it is also porous when it's dry and can be reactivated with water, so you definitely want to seal it. For this, I am going over my paint with DIY's black wax. I love the way the black wax just really richens that black color up and just gives it a whole other dimension. So I'm using a little soft bristle brush and I am dipping that into my black wax and I'm going directly over the paint with that wax, just rubbing it in very gently, making sure that I have good coverage, a nice light even coat, and then I'm taking a dry shop towel and just wiping back the excess ever so gently. Now, I could have called this project finished at this point, but one of my favorite things to do is to go in and really highlight the details of a piece. Now, there are several ways to do that. A couple of my favorites are distressing, which I had already decided I did not want to do on this piece, and using different colored waxes to highlight or lowlight certain areas. That's what I went ahead and did with this piece. So I'm using DIY's white wax and a little bitty brush, and I am just brushing that into the little cracks and crevices along the edges of this frame. Once I have a little bit of that white wax down in the grooves, I'm just taking my dry shop towel and wiping back the excess off of the top so that that white wax is only in the grooves. I also took just a little bigger brush and went along the indent on the outside of the frame as well, just putting a nice thin even coat of that white wax and then just wiping it back very gently with my dry shop towel so that I left just enough of a highlight so that you could see the details without distracting too much from that beautiful black color. Once I'd finished going around the frame with the white wax, it was time to remove my tape and clean up my glass. Now, one thing I can say is when you're putting Windex on your newly waxed piece, be sure not to spritz any of that onto the wax because it will ruin it if you leave it set there. So I just washed up my glass very carefully, and then this piece is done. I'm glad I chose the little black dress. I really think it was the perfect color for this frame, and I hope you guys like it too. My second project is another pretty darn simple one. These were part of the bird herd that I picked up not too long ago at the Goodwill. And even though I really had no intention of doing anything to these, when I washed them, whatever whitewash was on them ended up coming off. And it left kind of this weird red with like some gray and brown. I just really didn't like the look of them then. So it was time to give them a makeover. And I am starting by giving these each one good spray coat of Rustoleum 2X, and this is called Heirloom White, and it is a satin paint. Now, I didn't know when I sprayed them what color I was going to be going over them with, and if I had known, I probably would have sprayed them with a darker color. However, I ended up choosing DIY's Old School for these birds so that when I was done with them, they would look something like cement figurines. And Old School is a beautiful color. It's this beautiful dark gray, and since I'm going over an almost white color, I did have to go over these a few times. You can see there some of that white, like little sprinkles still shining through that gray paint. Now I'm pouncing this paint on or stippling it on so that it has a little bit of texture to it and there aren't any brushstroke marks in these birds. And once I got my third coat, I went ahead and set them aside to dry before going in and waxing them with DIY's white wax. So as I mentioned before, DIY paint can be reactivated with water and you definitely need to seal it. And I love putting white wax over dark colors like this to really highlight all of the beautiful detail. And once I've got my coat of wax on, again, I'm just wiping back the excess with a dry shop towel. Now, for some reason, some of these darker colors almost get shiny in spots when you wipe off the excess. So what I like to do in that case, so that I don't have this mottled finish, is I'll just grab my wax brush and just kind of pounce in a few of those areas back over with that white wax just to make it blend in a little bit better. Then I went in and did the very same thing to that second bird, just brushing on that white wax in a nice thin even layer and then wiping back the excess with that dry shop towel. I love how these little guys came out. They're going to be a perfect addition to some of my spring vignettes. Project 3 is a set of clay pots. I've had a whole bunch of these in my stash for probably 2 years now that I've been meaning to do something with. And since I was kind of on a spring kick anyway, I ended up grabbing these guys out and doing a little experiment with them. So I'm starting by giving them each a good coat of Rustoleum 2X in Espresso, which is this beautiful dark brown color. And the reason I'm doing these in this dark brown spray paint is that I wanted to go over them with a milk paint and get some crackle. And so that's what I'm doing here. This is Sweet Pickins Milk Paint in the color Creamy. I did not add any extra bond to this, and I am just quickly going over the paint, the spray paint, before it's even had a chance to really dry. In fact, I honestly picked up a little bit of that brown spray paint while I was putting this first coat on. And then once I have the entire first coat on the pot, I'm going in with my hairdryer and putting a little bit of heat on these to get that crackle effect. You can see there the crackling. Then I did the same thing to that second pot, just adding that quick first coat of the milk paint to the entire thing, trying to make it as even as possible without overworking the paint so that I was pulling the spray paint underneath. And then as soon as I had that first coat on, I'm going to go in with my hair dryer and put a little heat on this and get that beautiful crackle to come through. Once my first pot was dry, I grabbed it and put another coat of milk paint over that base coat, just making sure to kind of go in all the same direction so that my coat of paint is nice and even. Then I hit it again with my hair dryer, and this time I ended up getting quite a bit of chippiness. Now I ended up getting quite a bit more chippiness on this pot than I do on the second pot. You'll see that here in a minute. And I think it's just because I went over this one when the paint was even more wet than it was on the second pot. Now, the thing with milk paint and leaving out the extra bond is that it does what it wants. You just don't have any control over how much or how little chippiness you're going to get and where it's going to be. So it's one of those things that you just have to roll with whatever result you get. And so that's what I'm doing here. I grabbed some 220 grit sandpaper and I'm just sanding away, making sure to knock off any of the loose chunks of paint. And then I set that pot aside. Then I grabbed the second one, and like I said, on this one, you'll see that I didn't get quite as much chippiness. I mean, there's still quite a bit, but just not quite the amount as on the first pot. And again, I think that's because the paint on this one was just a little bit drier when I started. You can see all of that beautiful crackle coming through, and that's really kind of what I was going for, more so than the chippiness. But I'm just going to roll with it for these and just embrace the chippy. And so I'm again sanding with that 220 grit sandpaper to knock off any of the loose paint chunks and to give them a nice smooth finish. I also went ahead and painted the insides of both of my pots with 2 coats of the milk paint just to cover up that orangey terracotta color. Then it was on to sealing my paint. Now, as with the DIY paints, Sweet Pickins Milk Paint needs a sealer. For these, I chose their dark oil wax. I figured this would be a great way to really highlight the crackle in that creamy paint. So I'm using a chip brush and I'm just dipping the tips of the bristles into that oil wax and then spreading a nice thin, even layer all over each of my pots. Once I've got them completely coated, I went ahead and let that sit for about 15 to 20 minutes to really soak into the paint. Then I'm just coming back with a dry shop towel and wiping these down very well to get rid of any excess oil wax. Now, in all honesty, these pots didn't really turn out exactly the way I had pictured them in my head, but I'm really in love with this chippy, crackly, rustic finish on both of them, and it's definitely something I might try doing again in the future. Now, honestly, Project 4 is a little bit of an experiment. I have seen people on YouTube take old ugly vases and lamps and use joint compound to give them a beautiful textured finish and then paint them, and they turn out really, really well. And I thought, why not do that on these clay pots? Now, I don't have joint compound, but what I did have was spackle. So I am using spackle to give these pots all a textured feel, and I'm just using my hands to spread that spackle out, and I'm just kind of wiping it all in one even direction so that all of the texture kind of goes around the entirety of the pot. I didn't want the base to be textured, so I just kind of went around that with my fingers and smoothed it out. And then I added just a little bit to the rim just to kind of tie it all together. I did this same effect on all 3 pots, and then I set them aside to dry. Then it was on to paint, and again, I am using Sweet Pickins Milk Paint in this beautiful creamy color. I did not add any extra bond again, and in all honesty, I really didn't know what to expect with these. I had let the pots themselves sit and cure completely for almost 3 days before I'm going over them with paint, so I really didn't think I was going to get much of an effect, even though I'd left the extra bond out of the paint. I really didn't know what to expect at this point. I gave each of my pots 2 good even coats of milk paint, both inside and out, and then set them aside to dry. Now, one of the greatest benefits of using milk paint on a project is that if you're planning to put a transfer down, it is a breeze over milk paint. And these pots ended up being no exception, even with all of the texture and the lumps and bumps. Once I got my transfers placed and pressed down onto the paint, they were easy to apply. So I just peeled off that backing, laid my transfer where I wanted it, smoothed it down, and then I'm going over it with that transfer stick, rubbing as always down into the paint to apply the transfer. I'm just peeling back that piece of vellum just really slowly, making sure that all of my transfer is adhered to my pot as I go. This particular transfer set is called Vintage Labels, and it was the inspiration for this entire project, honestly. I've had these particular transfers in my stash for quite some time, and I was looking for an excuse to use them, and I thought these pots would be a perfect place for them. And here again, you can see I laid that second transfer down. I just used the transfer stick to make sure that it's well adhered before I start rubbing on one side. And then I just start in one corner and begin rubbing the transfer down into the paint as I peel back that little piece of vellum. And as I'm peeling, I'm just making sure that all of my pieces of transfer are well adhered to my pot. Once I have all of my transfers down, it is time to seal my paint. And again, for that, I chose Dark Oil Wax by Sweet Pickins, and I'm just using my chip brush to put a nice, light, even coat all over the inside and outsides of my pots. Now, you guys, as much as I wasn't expecting or didn't really know what to expect with these, I ended up getting beautiful crackle on these pots. And that's one of the reasons I decided to use this dark oil wax, is because, again, I wanted it to sink down into those cracks and really make them shine. So I'm just, again, going over the entire pot and then setting them aside to really soak in that oil wax for 10 to 15 minutes. Finally, it was time to wipe off the remaining oil wax, and for that, I'm just using a dry shop towel and going over these really, really well to make sure that I get all of the excess oil wax removed. Now, in all honesty, I was a little bit disappointed at how dark the outside of these pots ended up being, and I decided to try to remove a little bit of that darkness by going over them with DIY's clear wax. Clear wax acts almost like a little bit of an eraser over the darker waxes, and these oil waxes were no exception. You can see here as I'm working that clear wax over the front of the pot, how much lighter the paint is becoming. It was the perfect solution to get me exactly the color that I wanted and the finish that I was really looking for. You can see the difference here between the two pots. I went ahead and finished up the other two pots the same way, and then this little experimental project is finished, and I absolutely love how these came out. It's definitely a technique I will do again in the future. Well, that's it from here for today, you guys. I hope you liked my spring themed projects, and I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, please remember to give it a thumbs up. I so appreciate that. And if you haven't already, I would love it if you would subscribe to my channel and then just hit the little notification bell so you don't miss anything. And then of course, don't forget to drop a comment below and let me know what you thought of my projects for today. Just a quick reminder, the paint and products you see me use can be purchased through me at my website, and that's www.theeclecticcottagespokane.com. I carry DIY paint and products, Sweet Pickins Milk Paint and products, as well as some Recycled Treasures decoupage papers and some Redesign with Prima. So go check those out there. As far as my next video goes, I won't see you guys again until after the Christmas holiday. And since my next video would have been scheduled for Christmas Day, I am pushing that off until Thursday. And the video I'm hoping to have is going to be a thrift haul. My husband and I are going out on a junk run tomorrow. So it really all depends on what we find tomorrow on our junk run as to whether or not I'm even going to be able to have a video for Thursday. So if not, I've already got some projects going for the next video, which will be Saturday, so a week from today. So worst case, that's when I will see you again. Until then, I hope you guys have a fantastic rest of your weekend, beginning of the week, and Merry Christmas to all of you. Thank you so much for being here, you guys. I will see you later. Bye.